Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Forge of Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Alex Uli, and this is episode 128 of the Forge of Freedom. Today, for Monday Gun Day, I've got Mike Uli back in the studio. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Hey, Alex. Thanks for asking me.
Yeah, thanks for coming along. So, as I mentioned, I think I alluded to in a previous episode, we were planning to go to the NRA annual meeting in Dallas, Texas over the weekend, and we did in fact go. We got down there late Thursday night despite some delay because of the weather, but we attended the firearms law seminar half the day Friday, and then spent some time going around to exhibits on the convention floor, and then also attending a seminar by Ed Monk. And of course, the big news, and we'll get to this in a little bit, over the weekend was the membership meeting and then the board meeting. The membership meeting took place Saturday, and the board meeting is actually still going on as we're speaking right now. We're recording here on May 20th at 6:54 Eastern time. So they've had a lengthy board meeting. But of course, the part that was contentious about that is there's been lots of upheaval and dissent from the NRA among the membership and among some of the board members. And we'll get into some of that here in just a little bit to let you know what we've seen and some of the updates that we've got for you on that. But before we do, we'll talk about the convention itself, not just the meetings, starting with the legal seminar. Mike, did you have any thoughts about the legal seminar in particular?
Yeah, well, a couple things before I forget about it. If bear with me, please. This year we were in Dallas. Next year, the NRA convention, assuming the NRA is still around, I hope they will be. And the way things are going with respect to the board of directors elections today and how the directors meeting went the other day, I'm optimistic that things will be going much better next year, but it'll be in Atlanta. So for those of you that have an interest in what we're talking about, next year it's in Atlanta. I know I'm looking forward to that, not because I like Atlanta better than Dallas. I actually like Dallas better than Atlanta in terms of the city, but it's closer for us to drive to. So instead of flying, we'll probably drive down there. Anyway, to get to your question, the NRA annual firearms seminar, a couple of things. The biggest thing, I think, is just a logistics thing. And this is primarily focused upon, to attorneys, although non-attorneys can attend. But we've been attending this for a long time. I always look to you to tell me how long. It's been a long time. Year after year, it's very well attended. And there seems to be some consistency in the attendance, but this year it was very low in my estimation. I think you got an estimate, maybe somewhere you sent to me today from David Yamani, but I know his estimate may have been better because he spoke there, but it was probably at least half of what it usually is my guess. I don't know. May have been worse than that.
Yeah, the attendance was way down.
Yeah, and I think that was also reflected in terms of the overall attendance at the NRA annual meetings. I think it was down from years past when things were sort of flourishing. It was up from maybe Houston, which was the COVID year. The year after, I think they canceled it for COVID, but it was really down overall. So that's significant for a couple of things. I think that reflects the lack of support for the NRA. The lack of, not lack of members, but the reduced number of members, the reduced number of contributions they're getting. I think what you saw at the convention reflect that lack of support. And even the folks that attended, I can't tell you how many people like me, although we attended the seminar or attended the convention, we're not giving to the NRA any more money based upon the clowns that have been in charge there.
Yeah. And for those of you who don't know, the NRA annual meeting, as is obvious from the name, is an annual meeting hosted by the NRA at various cities around the country, and there are typically somewhere between 60 and 80,000 people in attendance over the course of the weekend. And it's a huge event. There are acres of exhibitors there on the convention floor. That all of the major firearms manufacturers and most of the businesses affiliated with the firearms industry are there. So it's a great opportunity to go and see them, but there's also great educational opportunities there, including the legal seminar, but also seminars that are free if you're an NRA member throughout the convention hall. In fact, we attended one of those by Ed Monk, which was really good, worth
Yeah, we can
checking out.
talk about that. But just to kind of specifically answer your question about the firearms seminar, I mean, it's always good to hear from Dave Koppel. He talked about, and your listeners have heard you talk about this. He talked about the Rahimi case and the Cargill case. Of course, the Rahimi case is a case where the Supreme Court is applying Second Amendment scrutiny to domestic violence restraining orders. And the Cargill case is where the Supreme Court is trying to determine whether the ATF's ban on bump stocks is constitutional or not. I won't go into the details of those, but he went into a great deal of detail with respect to those, and that was I thought his analysis was quite good and to the point and very good. We also had an opportunity to talk with Stephen Holbrook again, whom I think your listeners know, at least from my standpoint, is one of my favorite authors, and I think yours too. As a matter of fact, I bought a book. One of my favorite books from him is Gun Control in the Third Reich. But he also has a book I haven't read yet. It's called Gun Control in Nazi-Occupied France. That's here. I don't know if folks can see that. But anyway, that's a book I bought. I'm looking forward to reading that. David Yamani was there. He spoke at the seminar. By the way, a plug for him. He's still doing a webinar. It's a 6 or 7 or 8 part series that I think you can still sign up for online. And even though you've missed several of the beginning ones, you can go back and he provides you with a link to listen to those. He's a sociology professor at Wake Forest, who, although I think Michael Bain may be credited for coming up with the terms gun culture 2.0, Professor Yamani has basically filled in all the blanks about what that really means for us, I think. So,
yeah, he's an interesting guy because he's politically quite liberal, but speaks on the topic of guns and mostly in a favorable light. And he comes at it from a sociological perspective and talks about, like you said, this concept of gun culture 2.0, which is just this idea that gun culture today isn't the same as it was when people had to have guns to provide for their family, to put food on the table. That the primary driver, the impetus behind gun ownership today is different than it was, and we need to realize that when we're talking to people about firearms.
Yeah, so if you get a chance to look at that webinar he's doing, and he also has a book coming out too, sometime very soon, this summer, I think, called Gun Curious. I think that's the name of it. I hope. I apologize if it's not, but I'm pretty sure that's the title. I know I have that on order too, so when it comes in, we'll take a look at that. But it's always good to talk to folks like that and to hear what other lawyers have to say about what's going on in the Supreme Court. Like today, there was much talk about what was going to happen today at the Supreme Court with respect to whether the Supreme Court would grant cert. In other words, kind of the layperson's definition of that is whether they would hear a couple of the assault bans cases. One of them is from Maryland. The other is from Illinois. They indicated they weren't going to take the Maryland case. They haven't said what they're going to do about the Illinois case yet.
At least for now.
At least for now, yeah, because they said before, we're not going to take it. And I think they said something before final judgment. So what's important to realize is these cases, just because they didn't take the Maryland case, might not take the Illinois case right now, it doesn't mean they won't take them later, because these cases were up on appeal in what was called an interlocutory appeal, which means you're appealing what's going on in the lower court before the lower court is finished with the case. So that's not the end of the world. So we'll see what happens with regard to those. But there was a lot of talk there about that as well.
Yeah. And we also heard from Bob Cottrell, who I'd heard speak at Gun Rights Policy Conference in Phoenix last year. But he also spoke. He was the opening speaker at the Firearms Law Seminar at the NRA annual meeting. And he's also got some great books and some great material that you should check out. He's a professor as well. And I'll try to link to all these books in the show notes if I can remember all the books that we've mentioned so far. I think I can do that.
Yeah, I know you bought his book, and it was an excellent presentation that he gave for 45 minutes or so, something like, I don't remember exactly, but it was a good presentation. And I suspect his book is very good. I think he's a professor at George Washington. I think so. Anyway, so that's kind of what happens, in the legal seminar. And then you go onto the floor and you get to talk to folks that, you talk to them during the year, but you don't see them Like we get to see the folks at ACLDN, Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network, William and Amy and Gila and Marty Hayes. It was good to see them and talk to them. And of course, we always suggest that you take a good hard look at them as far as if you want somebody to help you out if you're ever involved in a self-defense shooting and you're faced with some difficulties from perhaps an overzealous prosecutor.
Yeah, and I got to sit down a little bit for an interview with them. They weren't sure if the audio was recorded. There may have been a hiccup with the audio recording, but if that audio did get recorded properly, then I'll be sure to share that interview with all of you. So yeah, we got to. That's a lot of what going to this event is about, is just seeing other people in the firearms community that we don't get to see all that often.
Yeah, and it was good. I hear that interview that you did was very good, so I hope it comes out.
Yeah,
we got to spend quite a bit of time with somebody you'd met that I hadn't met, and I was very glad to meet him, Dr. Edeen. If you want to say something about him and the time we had to spend some time with him, a lot of the time was to discuss cigars more than guns. But in any event, it was a very good. He's good to meet with him.
He's a pediatric orthopedic surgeon in San Antonio, and I met him last year at the event put on by Rick Ector in Detroit, the Legally Armed in Detroit event, where we trained somewhere between 12 and 1,300 women on the basics of firearm marksmanship and safety. But I met him there, and then I saw him again at Gun Rights Policy Conference and had good conversations with him both times, and knew he was going to the NRA annual meeting, and so made sure that we met up with him down there as well. But he's associated with the Doctors for Responsible Gun Ownership, and is really involved and active in the Second Amendment and the firearms training community as well. So
yeah,
it was great to catch up with him as well.
And it was good for me to meet him. It's always refreshing. Sometimes, at least for me, I think of most people in the medical community as being on the progressive side. So it's refreshing to meet somebody that understands the Constitution and understands our rights.
So let's talk a little bit about the seminar that we attended before we get into the membership meeting that we attended on Saturday. We went to a two-part.
I'm sorry, Alex, but I was going to mention we didn't talk about equipment. We usually stay away from equipment stuff, but just a couple of things.
Sure, yeah.
If you don't care. I mean, we got to, one of the things I think that folks, we're not big pushing equipment. What's the latest, the gee whiz thing out there and that sort of thing. But one thing that your local dealer can't carry every piece of equipment, so you can go in and kind of check it out and try it and see what you think. Compare brand A to brand B and brand C. But the NRA annual meeting it's a great opportunity for you if you're shopping or thinking about buying a purchase, whether it's a firearm or some accessory in the future, because almost every manufacturer of firearms, accessories, holsters, whatever, you can't imagine all the different folks that come there in terms of manufacturers, but it's a great place to do that. I know for me, we did an episode not too long ago about a red dot. I don't have a red dot for a pistol. I have them on rifles. It was an opportunity for me to go around to the Trigicon website and the Aimpoint website, or not website, booths, and put your hands on the products. I went to the Holosan site. I've kind of been thinking about a shotgun. You can look at the Beretta 1301 versus the Mossberg 940, actually feel them, talk to the reps. You can get some real good information. I know one firearm that we looked at, they have an interest in. Rob Pincus has a company and a firearm called Avidity, Avidity. Is that right?
Yeah.
Avidity Firearms. And he's got, I think it's called a PD-10. And it looks like a very interesting firearm. It's chambered in 9mm. It's a single stack, but it's also chambered in a cartridge that Federal came out with, and I think they've worked with Rob Pincus some. It's the 30, what's it called? The 30 Super Carry, I think is what it is. Which what that does, it's got ballistics very similar, perhaps some people would argue superior to 9mm, but it allows an increased capacity for single stack guns. So anyway, those are the sorts of things that you can do in terms of the equipment if you are inclined to attend one of these. And I think it just helps you because, like I said, your local firearm dealer can't carry everything, and it's a good place to get some additional information.
Well, just for example, you were talking about red dots. You could go from one red dot company, Holosan, and go to the Trigicon, and check out whatever you want to check out, Sig Sauer. But I remember we were looking at lever action rifles
Yeah.
as well. We went from Smith and Wesson to Henry to Marlin, and you could just try out back to back to back.
Yeah, within 10 minutes, we
Right.
had handled all of them.
Right. And so it's really a great opportunity to check out equipment that you're interested in as well. So definitely consider going to Atlanta next year if you can make it. We also attended the seminar by Ed Monk, which I'd never heard Ed Monk speak in person. I'd heard him on YouTube. He was interviewed or did an interview with Gila Hayes from Armed Citizens Legal Defense Network. That was actually the first time that I'd heard him speak. I'd heard of him, but hadn't heard him speak at all before that interview, and then saw him in person down in Dallas. And his presentation was excellent. It was about active shooter response, and it was a two-day lecture. It was 4 hours the first day,
2 hours,
and 2 hours the next day, so 6 hours total, but just loaded with stories and information and data. And it really just paints a picture about what so many organizations are doing with respect to preparation for these responses is really irresponsible.
Yeah, the first seminar was really about our history in this country, about how we responded to these active shooter threats, and most of it was covering the school shooter, but there were other government shootings and government facilities, businesses, open areas, things like that. But it mostly focused on the school, and he really focused on the unfortunate fact that we just failed. Most organizations don't have the guts to face what they need to do with respect to this threat. And, Alex and I have preached time and time again that we need to have armed personnel in the schools other than just a school resource officer. I don't want to go. I think what we'll do maybe is talk about this in some more detail. And I'm going to give him absolute credit because he does. It's amazing the data he's come up with to kind of explain how we've responded to these things and how we continually fail in our response to these things. And so he took the first 4-hour seminar basically to talk about the problem, kind of lay it out, what we've been doing, the statistics. He's got an enormous amount of statistics on all the school shootings going back into the 80s and even before that. So, and he provides recommendations to organization schools, and he kind of shared with us what some of the recommendations are. I mean, basically, this is about cutting down or reducing the victims. And if you think about schools, reducing the victims that occur in these school shootings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And this is just one example. We attended his seminar, but there were other really great lecturers there as well. John Correa from Active Self-Protection was there and spoke on a few occasions. And Lieutenant Colonel Dave Grossman was there, and John Lott was there. And you can hear all these people speak for free if you're a member of the NRA. So it's really a great opportunity to hear from folks with vast amounts of knowledge in their particular expertise. So it's a great opportunity.
And and his second 2-hour class on Saturday was about, how the individual responder might deal with an active shooter, because an active shooter is completely different than the person that may commit an armed robbery. Mm-hmm. And there are a whole plethora of things that you need to think about with respect to, how somebody might respond to an active shooter if you're inclined to do that, if you're out in public somewhere. And I guess, the other thing, I'd never heard Ed Monk speak either, and he's got quite a set of credentials. I'd never heard him speak, but after I spent 6 hours listening to him, I certainly at this juncture would recommend that people attend his seminars and attend training with him. He has a training facility, I think it's called Last Resort, down around Little Rock somewhere.
Yeah, and if you're watching by video, you can see I put up on the screen, it's actually a picture from his lecture or seminar at the NRA annual meeting. You can see the Facebook page is called Last Resort Firearms Training down in Little Rock, Arkansas.
Yeah, and here's what I'd say. What's unique about Indiana is that we have a new law in Indiana. It's just a couple of years old. Is it 2 years old? Whatever it is in Indiana, where local school boards can get money to train their teachers. And I got to tell you, I think it's negligence, bordering on gross negligence, if local school boards don't get a guy like Ed Monk, at least get him in and listen to what he has to say. I think he makes a compelling argument, as he doesn't say this, but I think he makes a compelling, at least I don't think he does. He makes a compelling argument, I think, for the contention that these school boards are just committed. It's just negligence. They're just
Yeah.
not. They're just not living up to their fiduciary duty if they don't do more than what I understand most have been doing. So anyway, we'll talk about that more in another episode, maybe.
Yeah, I think it's worth going into more detail with respect to his presentation. When it was called, you can see here the sign if you're watching by video, Considerations for Armed Responders to Active Shooter Attacks. That was the actual sign outside of the...
That was the second one on... That was the 2-hour one.
Saturday.
Then he had a third one about riots. We didn't get to 10 because we were traveling. But
right. And I'll just link to his Facebook page in the show notes, but it's Last Resort Firearms Training, and it's actually in Whitehall, Arkansas. I said Little Rock, but I believe
think that's outside.
Just outside of Little Rock. So definitely check that out and check out his class offerings as well. And definitely look him up on YouTube. All right. So with that said, Mike, the next thing I think we want to chat about is the membership meeting, and then more recently the board meeting, which took place today. But the membership meeting took place Saturday, and that membership meeting is open to any member who wants to come.
Well,
you can't vote unless you get your voting credentials, and you can only vote if you've been an annual member for 5 consecutive years, a 5-year member, or a lifetime member,
or above.
But any member can attend. But if you want to vote, you have to go get your voting credentials. And we went through that process actually for the first time, and it was no big deal. It was actually a fairly well run and fairly well organized process from our experience.
Yeah, I mean, looking at it from the outside, better than the government does generally.
Yeah, exactly. And so we attended that meeting. It was set to begin at 10 a.m. and we got there a little bit early so we could get a good seat. And the meeting at the outset, the directors, the officers, I should say, the directors, I think, refers to the board of directors. So the officers, like the leadership of the NRA, it was really strange. When they walked in, they came out to music, Thunderstruck by AC/DC, almost like they were celebrating themselves, and they were walking out like they were the starting lineup of the '96 Chicago Bulls or something. It was really bizarre.
Cult-like came to mind. And I know, actually, here's another... Professor Yamani is smarter than I am. He used the word, I think, lack of humility. I think he did anyway. He's talked about that seemed to be a lack of humility.
I think that was with respect to the topics that came up throughout the meeting.
Well, that could be.
I'm sorry, with the very beginning.
Yeah, but even
when they walked onto the stage that was set up, it was really strange. And this is a meeting about the members and about the membership, and they're making it about themselves. That was first.
It was awful.
I had very little information about these people other than what we saw in the NRA, the New York litigation. So this is really my first time seeing these people in person, and it was just a terrible impression.
Yeah, most of them.
Yeah. So anyway, it didn't start out well from my perspective in that regard.
Now we're talking about the board of directors now, not some of the directors.
No, not the board of directors, the officers.
Officers,
yes, yeah. So John Frazier and Charles Cotton and some of those folks, and I'm going to mess up the name, Arundellum. He's the interim replacement for Wayne LaPierre. But anyway, so they started out and they did sort of ceremonial things like recognizing the oldest member and the youngest member in attendance at the meeting, which was nice, but really not what everybody was there for.
Well, you got to keep in mind, they're slow. What I use the term slow rolling this meeting because they've pre-designed. They're supposedly in a prior agreement that this is going to cut off about 12 o'clock noon.
Yeah, so they set aside 2 hours.
And they're using the excuse because everybody wants to go watch Trump speak.
Yeah,
okay,
so which is at 2 o'clock.
So they fill the program with all this pomp and circumstance and some other things. Some of them were fine.
Yeah.
But anyway, then they start. Go ahead.
So then they start, after they get through all this pomp and circumstance, all this stuff to fill the time, to avoid talking about the trial and the things that came out during the trial in New York.
And more importantly, what the leadership's going to be going forward and what we're going to do to reform things.
So they finally, over an hour after the meeting started talking about resolutions. And what were the first 2 resolutions?
When the resolutions are brought up so that the folks in attendance like us could speak about the resolutions. And these are yay or nay. People in the audience like us could speak about them. And then ultimately there would be a vote. about these resolutions.
And these are resolutions that board members make or that members make about proposed changes to the organization or proposed changes to procedure, things like that.
Okay. And we saw some of these resolutions, or at least one or two before, and they're very valid, and they really were speaking to some of the problems that the NRA has had. And that have been demonstrated as a result of the New York Attorney General's litigation against the NRA.
Yeah.
But anyway.
So they have the first two resolutions are about whether or not to recognize Donald Trump and Governor Abbott in Texas as defenders of the Second Amendment. I can't remember what the title was exactly.
And they were separate resolutions.
They were separate resolutions.
To take more time.
So again, just slow rolling the process to get as close to noon as possible to avoid anything of importance.
Yeah.
Okay. So finally, they get to one resolution that's got some significance. And it's primarily, I think, because the officers wanted this resolution to pass and probably thought that it would pass. But the resolution was whether or not to move the headquarters of the NRA to Texas.
As opposed to where it's at now in Fairfax, Virginia.
Correct. Yep. And
outside Washington, D.C.
Initially, when I heard applause about this resolution, I thought, oh, man, this is going to pass pretty resoundingly.
I was concerned because we were and I got nothing wrong with Texas. Don't get me wrong at all. And maybe that's where the NRA ought to end up.
Right.
But I was like, hey, the deck's loaded here. They think they're going to get this passed because we're in Texas. Who's going to vote against Texas?
Yeah. So then, as we said, after each resolution is proposed, people from the audience, members themselves can actually, or people on the board of directors can actually get up and talk about whether or not they support the resolution. And thankfully, Ken Campbell, Rob Pincus, and Amanda Suffolcool.
And there was another director too.
And
I
didn't
write her name down.
Oh, a female. I was thinking of a male.
But anyway, there was a male and a female.
There were two others that I didn't catch their name, but there were three that in particular that I thought really changed the tone of the discussion about this resolution. And the questions were, how much is it going to cost to move, by Ken Campbell, how much is it going to cost to make this move? The officers didn't know.
They just BS'd. The bottom line is they did not know.
They did not know. Amanda Suffolcool gets up and says, I understand that we have $30 million in deferred maintenance to our current headquarters that we'd have to pay to fix it up before we could sell it. That strikes me as hitting my car with an axe and telling my husband I need a new car because the old one's broken. Mm-hmm. Okay. And then Rob Pincus gets up and makes some other excellent points as well. So that, I think, really changed the tone of the meeting, and especially with respect to that resolution.
Yeah.
But one thing in particular that was really telling, Charles Cotton, the president, the former president.
Yes, the former president.
Former president. I'm giving away the
hint. You're giving away some future here.
He had like a nervous tick the whole time. He kept like cranking his neck and like pulling at his shirt. You could tell he was not comfortable during the meeting at all.
At least that's the way it looked. Maybe he looks that way all the time. I don't know.
But when Amanda got up and asked her question, he said, how long, my friend, Miss Suffolcool, how long have you been a board of director? Knowing that she had only been elected about a year.
As if she couldn't have anything intelligent to say because she hadn't been around long.
It was just such a prick comment.
But
and
Rob
so
Pincus,
dismissive. Yep. And Rob Pincus said, Mr. President, how long have you been running this organization into the ground?
Yeah.
And he didn't say that at the mic, but most people could hear him, at least on our side of the room. So I thought that was a great retort. Yeah. So anyway, that I lost. I already did. I had very little respect for Mr. Cotton going into the meeting. I had zero after the meeting.
Yeah. And I don't know what their motivation was. I think I have some theories about what their motivation was for him and Mr. Brewer and other folks to want to move to Texas. But that doesn't matter now. And by the way, we're not, and this is nothing bad about Texas. I think everybody, or at least a lot of people, think the NRA ought to move its main headquarters somewhere else to a gun-friendly state like Texas or Indiana or Tennessee or Wyoming or, Idaho, someplace, ought to move it to a gun-friendly, and not, don't offend anybody out there that's from another gun-friendly state I didn't mention, but it's just not time from a financial standpoint to incur that expense right now because, like I said at the beginning, the NRA is bleeding money profusely. to pay for all this litigation, and they're losing members. It's not time to be spending money like that. And I really have enormous respect for those 5 people that spoke. And I'm sorry I can't remember the other 2, but Amanda Suffolk, Ken Campbell, who's the director or operations director, CEO. I'm not sure what his title is, but he runs the place, Gunsight. He's a squared away American, a Hoosier as well, although he lives in Arizona now. And then Rob Pincus, who is been a trainer for a long time.
He runs Personal Defense Network, PDN.
Yeah, enormous amount of energy, and he's the founder and one of the owners of Avidity Firearms that we talked about. Yeah. So enormous kudos to those folks for speaking, and we appreciate them enormously.
And I've put up here on the screen Gun Culture 2.0, which is David Yamani's website. He has an article here, NRA at Crossroads, where he actually posted some video that he took of the discussion about this relocation to Texas. So if you're interested in that debate and what happened there, we could probably get the name of those other 2 directors from watching this video. Yeah. So definitely go check that out if you're interested in that discussion. But the other thing that they brought up at the meeting, and this was actually closer to the beginning, I'm going in reverse order here a little bit. They talked about, Charles Cotton started out talking about how the NRA in this lawsuit in New York was the victim, and which is true to some degree. The organization itself, the membership, was victimized, but he characterized it as they were victimized by these outside people, by these other organizations, by these marketing firms, okay? And which is true, but not completely true. The other big part that he completely left out is that it was at the behest of the officers themselves, of Wayne LaPierre, of the people like John Frazier and Charles Cotton, turning a blind eye and even being complicit in this grift off of the membership of the NRA.
Yeah, and don't misunderstand anything we're saying. Letitia James, who's the Attorney General of New York, is lower than whale excrement in my mind, okay, in terms of her motivations. But Alex and I were kind of come up with an analogy. And did the NRA ever do anything ever so slightly wrong? Probably. It's kind of like, if the cops pull you over for doing 56 and a 55, did you break the law, and could you get a ticket for an infraction? Yeah. Is that kind of a prick thing to do? Yeah. But when they see the dead body in the back of the seat, now it's gotten serious. And I think that's what happened to a great extent in this Letitia James litigation up there.
Yeah, and this is where I think David Yamani was saying that they lacked humility and they would refuse to take responsibility for their own actions. Mm-hmm. And that's exactly what happened at the membership meeting.
Well, I think that's consistent with how they come out, like rock stars.
Yeah.
I mean, in the beginning, they come out like rock stars.
Yeah.
And then they blame everything on everybody else.
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, it's almost like getting pulled over for a minor infraction, and then the officer sees a dead body in the back of your car. Well, that's kind of what happened here. The Letitia James started out the lawsuit with political motivations, maybe. Okay, well, based on some small violations, but then
she got into court,
discovered through discovery through the court process, lots of serious problems and mishandling of funds and self-dealing, most concerningly. Flying on private jets, taking helicopters to NASCAR races, sending friends to nice vacation locations, just really wasting and living lavish lifestyles at the expense of the membership. And that really flies in the face of what the NRA is all about, which is the members. What gives the NRA so much power, at least historically, is that they have millions of members who give just a little bit of their money each year or each month. Okay.
And they vote.
And they don't have, the members don't have millions of dollars or billions of dollars in the case of the Bloomberg funded organizations. Okay. It's the power of numbers and people. Okay. Not power of numbers and dollars.
Yeah.
And they were taken advantage of by outsiders, but also by NRA leadership itself. So there was this slate of candidates, which some of you would know about.
Oh, tell them about one more thing, the little thing about Cotton, about when they called the vote on this. They called the vote on this resolution, whether to move the headquarters to Texas. And don't get me wrong, I think everybody in the room agrees there ought to be maybe leave a legislative branch or that sort of thing in the Washington, D.C. area, but the NRA ought to move. But in any event, they called for a vote on this, whether this needs to happen now and in Texas, and tell them what happened. You lift up you get this little card you lift up to vote either yay or nay. Go ahead.
So they ask who's in favor of the resolution to move to Texas, and then they count and they say who, they take a count based on visual, and then they say who's not in favor.
Well, and then when they say who's in favor, I think maybe 20% of the room says, yeah I'm in favor.
25 to 30 tops percent. Yeah. All right. And then they ask who's not in favor, and by clear majority,
50, 60, 70%. We raise our thing.
70, 80% say no, they're not in favor because you don't know what it's going to cost. You don't have your stuff in Virginia ready to go, ready to sell.
Yeah, I think largely because of the 5 people we mentioned.
The NRA's bleeding money anyway. And so it was clear no. And what's Charles Cotton do? He looks out at the audience and pretends that he can't tell who won the vote.
And you talk about the boos he got from that one, along with criticizing Amanda Suffolk.
Yeah. So he turns back to John Fraser and he says, can you tell who?
And why do you think he asked John? This is absolute conjecture on our part.
I think he was trying to buy time to see if there was something he could think up to either table the resolution or revote or discuss it further or something. I think he was looking back to say, hey,
because John Fraser is.
Do you have any ideas about what we might do to fix this problem out here that we clearly lost? Right?
Yeah, because John Fraser is the secretary and lawyer.
Yeah. So it was clearly Charles Cotton trying to engage in shenanigans and just corruption, essentially.
So the meeting's not going his way. So what happens next?
So, it's noon. It's time to go see Trump.
Yeah.
Right. So meeting closed. Jeff Knox, one of the reform candidates, gets up at the mic and tries to yell, "Only the membership can end the meeting. Only the membership." To no avail. The officers walk out. Meeting's over. Overall, it was civil. Despite the contention near the end, it was very civil. Really, the only one that came out stained was the Charles Cotton and the NRA leadership. I thought that the people who spoke out against their resolutions were very professional and had made good points. And like you said, thankfully they did.
But ultimately, they didn't really address any business except that one resolution.
Very little. Yeah, very little. And again, this was all to avoid the things that came out during the New York trial. Legitimate evidence, things that we know now as true, as fact, about the corruption at the NRA. So with that being said, there was this slate of reform candidates that were running for the NRA board of directors who were all elected. Never has anybody been elected by ballot that wasn't like on the recommended by the committee.
Yeah.
Okay.
And the committee was previously controlled by
Wayne LaPierre and
the other officers.
Leadership, right? The other officers. So not only were they elected, all 4 were elected, and 3 of the 4 were in the top 5 vote getters.
Yeah.
Okay. So it was a strong signal that the reform movement had some legs, had some strength, had some momentum.
And over the weekend, the 76th director was also elected, and that was a reform candidate too. Mr. Wallace, what's his first name? James Wallace. James Wallace.
So Jeff Knox, and people may recall I did an episode with Jeff Knox about the reform candidates last year, actually, or maybe earlier this year. I can't remember exactly when it was, but I'll link to that. I think it was episode 64. But Jeff Knox, Dennis Fusaro, Rocky Marshall, and who was the 4th one? Shoot.
I don't remember names. I have to look it up.
Phil Journey.
Okay. Yeah.
And so those 4 reform candidates were elected in the election, and then James Wallace was elected as the 76th director over the candidate Joel Friedman that was endorsed and assisted, it seems like, by the leadership of the NRA by a significant margin. So with all that being said, the meeting ended, but nevertheless, we've got this hope, this inkling of hope, because these reform candidates had been elected.
And these reform candidates are people that want to come in and make changes.
Right.
Like make rules that you can't,
more transparency,
open meetings. You can't
engage in self-dealing,
where you're giving money to a vendor and you're somehow getting rewarded back or what. I mean, they want to avoid all that thing and make this a real member run organization where the members are given real information and also real input.
Don't do stuff behind closed doors in executive session. Leave meetings open to the membership, right? Yeah. Which was a topic that came up today, Monday. So anyway, today, Monday, was the board meeting. So Saturday was the membership meeting. Today, Monday, was the board meeting. It started at 10 o'clock. And my understanding is that there was only one media reporter.
No, that was, I don't know if that was not there, but that talked to, we'll get to that in a minute, talked to the new executive vice president, the new person that's taken.
Well, far fewer people attend the board meeting because it's after the convention
on
is
Monday
over.
Morning.
It's on Monday morning. Most people have already gone home, like us.
Yeah, and it's to elect the officers.
Right.
That is the president, the first vice president, the second vice president, and the executive vice president, who has previously been, which Wayne LaPierre previously filled. And that's the person that's out there that everybody sees.
Yep.
The face, the mouthpiece for the organization, so to speak. But this election occurs starting on Monday morning at 10 o'clock. We came on, started this podcast, half an hour ago?
Yeah.
They were still meeting. But, we said there were these reform directors elected. And the hope was these 76 directors in years past had gone in there and just Wayne LaPierre got his way, and they continued upon their vices and their corruption.
They were all cronies of LaPierre.
Yeah, and the meeting was always closed. They'd always go in an executive session. So many things were done in public. This year, the first positive sign was they went in, I think it was first, and they decided the meeting was going to be open.
Yeah, there was a vote, and it was a close vote.
It was a close vote.
With like 5, maybe 6 votes difference to keep the meeting open.
So the question was whether these reform candidates, these 4 or 5 people getting elected, and what the NRA has been engaged in, whether there was enough of these directors that were already there, whether they would have the backbone to start making some changes.
And that's a great point. Some people might think, how could 4 or 5 reform directors, candidates, make a change in a board of directors that's 76 people in size?
Yeah.
Right. So, well, it's because, as you say, their hope was that there are enough people within that existing board of directors that believe in reform, but didn't believe they had the numbers or the support to do so previously. Okay. That they might change or speak up now.
And if you were at that members meeting on Saturday, you had to conclude that meeting with a sense that there was momentum there to go against the existing regime, because Tom Cotton and team did not win that event.
So before this board meeting, the NRA officers send out a letter or an email, I can't remember what the form it was, with their selection about who they think should be the new officers.
And these are 7 officer positions.
And they said the committee unanimously places in nomination the following individuals for indicated offices: Bob Barr, Blaine Wade, Tom King, Ronnie Barrett, John Frazier, Sonia Rowling, and Robert Menzinger. And these are all people who are in support of the current regime, the current leadership, and presumably would cover for the tracks of past wrongdoing. Okay, that's the idea anyway. Okay, so the question was whether the reform movement could put up people to run for election during the board meeting and take these seats. And it's for president, first vice president, second vice president, executive vice president, secretary, treasurer, and chief compliance officer. And before we started this recording, 3 of the top 4 had been won by reform candidates. So that's great news for the NRA going forward. Of course, that doesn't mean things are going to change instantaneously, but it's a good sign, and it's a good first step.
Yeah. Well, not only that, the meeting was open.
Yeah.
The meeting was open. The reform candidate lost. That was Buzz Mills, who owns Gunsight with his wife. And I would have voted for him over Bob Barr. Bob Barr is a former congressman, ultra conservative congressman, Republican. At one point, he got defeated in a primary, I think, then left Congress. He eventually ran on the Libertarian ticket for president. So all in all, you would think he would be a good person. The strike I have against him is that he has been part of the previous regime. But if the reform candidates get in every other office position, I think he'll have to get in line. The good thing about Bob Barr is, I guess, he may know his way around Congress a little bit, and the politics of Washington. So, but the good news is the other three that we know about so far, like you said, 3 out of 4 have been won by
so an establishment
reform candidates.
Yeah, an establishment candidate won president, Bob Barr, but then vice president was won by Bill Bockenberg, a reform candidate. Second vice president was won by Mark Vaughn, another reform candidate. And then fourth, Doug Hamlin won the election against Ronnie Barrett for executive vice president, which was Wayne LaPierre's position. So,
yeah, and I'm surprised because I think there were a lot of people. I mean,
and I'm looking here, by the way, at NRA in Danger. It's nraindanger.wordpress.com. It's a great resource to follow.
Yeah, and I would commend Stephen Gutowski too, Gutowski, who has the website or the newsletter called The Reload.
Yeah,
he's been there, and I think when he got the first statement, I think from Mr. Hamlin when he was elected as the executive vice president. So,
and I put up Stephen Gutowski's X account here at Stephen Gutowski. It's STEPHENGUTOWSKI. So I'll link to his X page in the show notes as well.
Yeah, and you can see, like I said, he got the first statement, I think, from Doug Hamlin. So, and and Doug Hamlin talked about there's going to be transparency, and essentially he's going to return this organization to the members.
Yeah,
and not as a cash cow for the officers.
So, I'll link to Stephen Gutowski's website as well as his X page.
And
like I said, this is all great news, and we'll provide you with an update probably next week after we know more. I actually spoke with Jeff Knox while we were at the member meeting, and I hope to get him on the show here in the near future as well to talk about what the status is and what the hope is for the future. Of course, the NRA trial in New York is a 2-part trial. There was the first phase, which was just about whether or not there was any wrongdoing, any liability on the part of the NRA. The second part is, okay, now we know that there was wrongdoing. What should the punishment be? What should the recourse be for the NRA, for the membership primarily? And that part should be over, we understand, by July 25th. So we'll know a lot more in July. But in the meantime, what are the plans of the NRA board of directors and officers to prepare for that and to be prepared to pick up whatever pieces are left when that happens?
Yeah. So, but anyway, so far as we talked tonight at 7:40 p.m. On May the 20th, everything looks, it's not perfect, but it's going in the right direction. And if you had asked us if we would take this yesterday, I think all of us that supported those reform candidates would say yes.
Yeah, this is not everything that the reform movement wanted, but it's a great step forward. So absolutely, we would have taken this if it had been offered yesterday.
Yeah, and you might think, what do we care? Like me, every month I give the Firearms Policy Coalition. I'm a member of GOA, great organizations at this juncture, and they're doing excellent work. With that said, we still need the NRA. Because the NRA has been a great grassroots organization. It's a great educational organization, and we need that. We need that organization, I think, in this environment where we have the progressive trying to take away gun rights left and right, no matter where it's at.
Well, and GOA and Firearms Policy and Second Amendment Foundation, and some other organizations, state level organizations, they're great organizations, but they pale in comparison to the size of the NRA, even still after the NRA's lost lots of membership. But the other thing is that the NRA has historically been very territorial with respect to the realm of the Second Amendment, and firearms. And what we hope with the reform movement and what I've heard some of the reform candidates say is that we want to be more cooperative with these other organizations and taking a unified front against, the gun control lobby and the government trying to take away our rights and liberties. So I'm hopeful that the NRA can change their approach in that regard as well.
And that's interesting you say that, because I can't remember the gentleman's name that we were talking to right after the members meeting. He had been in the Trump administration, was a candidate, was very close to becoming appointed the whatever the head is of the
director of the ATF.
Director of ATF. And he was talking about the fact that, being part of the Trump administration, one of the things he noticed was that, how the pro-life lobby worked together instead of competing for supporters. And that,
I can't remember the way he characterized it, but he basically said
more articulate than
it was basically like the gun lobby was junior high compared to
and they didn't get it, and they weren't working together because, when you combine your efforts, 1 + 1 isn't 2, 1 + 1 is 3.
Yeah.
I think essentially is what he was trying to say. And he articulated it much better than I did. So hopefully that sort of thing comes around.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Well, I think that's where we'll leave it for this episode. We're 50 minutes in already. So I think hopefully we gave you some information that was useful, shed some light on the current state of the NRA and where things may be heading. Like I said, we'll try to get you updated sometime in the near future once we know more. So Mike, thanks again for coming along.
Enjoyed it. Thanks. Enjoyed this weekend too.
Yeah. It's good to be back in Indiana, but it was great to be in Texas for a little bit.
I want to say one last thing.
Sure.
When you're in Texas, that's great. They're very proud of their state. Don't mess with Texas, whatever. But when I'm there, I always think, you know what? These Texans actually, as far as gun rights are concerned, they don't have it as good as us Hoosiers.
Yeah. We saw no gun signs everywhere.
Yeah, you see no gun signs. You got the 30-06. It has the force of, you got their signs on buildings. So other than our red flag law in Indiana, which is certainly a stain on us, I think overall you could certainly make a very good argument that with respect to gun rights and maybe all rights, we've got it better here in the Hoosier state than the Texans do. They just don't know it.
Well, the culture there is certainly very, at least the traditional historical culture there is very pro-gun, and that's still there. Unfortunately, there's a lot of more progressive-minded folks moving in.
Our government, it's like some people say, sometimes they want to be your mommy, and in some other places they want to be your daddy.
I don't know too many Californians moving to Indiana.
No.
So
no.
Anyway, all right, everybody. I hope you.
We shouldn't diss Texas. I love Texas.
Right. Yeah, we love Texas too. That's right. All right, everybody. I hope you learned a little something. I hope you found it useful. If you did, don't forget to like and subscribe to help us spread the message of freedom. As always, you can find us on YouTube, Rumble, Facebook, and all the most popular podcast streaming platforms. You can also find us on X at Forge of Freedom and at forgeoffreedom.com. Until next time, everybody, remember, you are the Forge of Freedom.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Forge of Freedom. Be sure to subscribe wherever you heard this podcast so you never miss a future episode. For more information or to connect with Alex, you can go to forgeoffreedom.com or follow him on Twitter at Forge of Freedom. Until next time, remember, you are the Forge of Freedom.